11 years ago, the Halston Police Department released 22 seconds of dashboard camera video, and a city looked at it and argued about it for a while and moved on. 22 seconds. Everybody agreed on that number. It was in the press release. It was in the county report. It was printed in the newspaper twice. Then, on a cold Tuesday in October, a 64-year-old woman sat down in a basement archive with a pair of reading glasses and a legacy optical drive and did the one thing nobody had done in 11 years. She counted the frames. 660 frames in the clip the public had seen, 22 seconds at 30 frames a second. That part was true, but the file on the drive held 849. Odessa Rule sat very still in that chair for a long moment. Then she took off her glasses, folded them, set them on the desk, and said out loud to an empty room, "The recording starts at frame 1. Because Odessa Rule had spent 30 years restoring damaged film, and in 30 years she had learned one thing about human beings that had never once failed her. People cut the end. Nobody throws away the beginning. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what Odessa Vance Rule actually did for a living, because almost nobody does, and because it is the only reason this story exists. She was not an investigator. She was not a lawyer. She had never in her life been to a protest, written a letter to an editor, or spoken at a county meeting. If you had stopped her on the street in Halston, Maryland, and asked her what she was, she would have told you the truth in 3 words. She was a technician. She had come up in film. Real film, acetate and polyester, sprocket holes and splicing tape. She started in 1983 at a restoration house outside Philadelphia, 22 years old, hired to clean and inspect prints for $8 an hour, and she found out inside of a month that she had the one thing that trade requires and cannot teach. She could see a splice. Not the obvious kind. Anybody can see a bad splice. She could see the good ones. She could run a print at speed and feel the moment where somebody, 40 years earlier, had taken 2 feet out and put it back together so carefully that the join was invisible, and she would stop the machine and back it up and put her finger on the frame and be right. Her supervisor asked her once how she did it. She thought about it for a while because she wanted to give him a real answer. "The picture doesn't lie," she said, "but the rhythm does. When somebody takes something out, the rhythm limps." She spent 30 years doing that work. 12 years at the restoration house, 6 at a museum, cataloging a donated collection of home movies from the 1930s, the greatest job she ever had and the worst paying. 9 at a studio archive in Culver City, where she learned digital and did not enjoy learning it. And then, in 2013, she and her husband came back east because his mother was failing, and Odessa took a contract position with the Marin County Records System, digitizing 40 years of accumulated municipal paper, video, and audio. She meant to stay 2 years. She was still there 12 years later, part-time, on a rolling contract, because the county could not afford anybody good, and she could not stand the thought of what would happen to those shelves if they hired somebody cheap. Her husband was named Warren Rule. Warren had been a projectionist for 19 years. That is how they met. At a theater in Ardmore in 1985, where she had come to check a print, and he had refused to let her touch his machine until she proved she knew what a changeover was. Then the theaters went digital, and the booth jobs went away, and Warren went back to school at 41 and taught middle school shop for the last stretch of his working life, which he said was easier than projection because 8th graders were less temperamental than a carbon arc. He died in 2018. Heart. Fast. On a Saturday. In the driveway. With a bag of mulch in his hands. Odessa kept the house. She kept his tools in the garage exactly where he left them. Not out of sentiment, she'd tell you, but because she used them. And she kept working, because she was 64 years old, and she had never in her adult life gone more than 9 days without something in her hands that needed fixing. Their son, Curtis Rule, was 41, an X-ray technician at a hospital in Baltimore, married, with a 9-year-old daughter named Bee, who called her grandmother Des for reasons nobody had ever managed to trace. Curtis worried about his mother constantly and expressed it entirely through complaints about her car. That's the whole picture. A widow in a brick house on Delvin Street with a garage full of a dead man's tools, a granddaughter who couldn't say Odessa, and a part-time county contract that was, by any measure anyone would have applied that October, the least interesting job in Marin County. In September, the county voted to close the old evidence annex on Rowe Street. The building had gone up in 1971, and it had been condemned in stages, the way old public buildings are. First the third floor, then the loading dock, then the freight elevator, until eventually somebody added up the deferred maintenance and discovered it would cost more to keep than to knock down. Everything in it had to go somewhere. Physical evidence went to the state facility in Jessup. Paper went to microfilm and then to a warehouse. And the media, reel-to-reel audio, VHS, Betacam, Hi-8, Mini-DV, CDs, DVDs, magneto-optical cartridges, and roughly 400 unlabeled hard drives from the 2000s, had to be digitized to a modern archival standard before disposal, because state records law says so, and because in 2011, a neighboring county had thrown out a box that turned out to matter. The contract went out to bid in August. 2 firms responded. One of them was a company in Virginia that quoted a price and a timeline that made Joanne Tate laugh out loud in her office. Joanne Tate was 57, the county records administrator, 3 years and 4 months from a full pension, and a woman who had spent her career being told that records management was not important, right up until the moment it was the only thing anybody cared about. She called Odessa on a Thursday. "How much of the fall do you have?" "All of it." "Why?" "Because I need somebody who won't hand me back 400 corrupted images and an invoice." "How many drives?" 391, plus the tape. Odessa was quiet for a second. "That's not a fall, that's a year." "I've got until March. The building comes down in April. Then you've got a problem." "I have a great many problems, Odessa. Do you want the work or not?" Odessa took the work. She set up in the basement of the annex, in a room that had been the film development lab in 1974 and had been a storage closet ever since, with a folding table, 4 workstations she brought herself, a scanner, 3 legacy drive readers, and a space heater, because the boiler in that building had been running on faith since the Clinton administration. The work was slow, physical, and profoundly boring. Pull a drive, log the label, if there was one, image it, verify, generate a hash, catalog, shelve, next. She did 30 to 40 a week. By the 3rd week of October, she had done 111. And on Tuesday, October the 21st, at about 2:15 in the afternoon, she pulled a magneto-optical cartridge out of a plastic case with a faded county property sticker on it, and the sticker had a case number on it, and the case number was 14083391. She did not recognize it. That's important. She wants people to know that. She did not go looking. She had no idea what she had in her hand. She put it in the reader, imaged it, and started her verification pass. And the verification failed. Here is the thing that people who have never done this work do not understand. Verification is not watching the video. Odessa Rule did not sit in that basement and watch 22 seconds of anything. That is not how the job goes. The job is arithmetic. You compare what the file says it is against what the catalog record says it should be, and when the 2 numbers disagree, you stop and find out why. Because a mismatch means either the file is damaged or the record is wrong, and both of those are problems you have to solve before you shelve it and walk away. The catalog record for item 14-08-3391 said, Video Digital 00000022. 22 seconds. The file on the cartridge ran 28 3/10. Odessa frowned at the screen, wrote the discrepancy on a legal pad, and did what she had done 10,000 times. She went to the frame count, because duration can round and frames cannot. 30 frames per second. 849 frames. 22 seconds is 660. She sat back in the chair. 189 frames, 6 3/10 of a second. Now, at that moment, Odessa Rule had 4 possible explanations, and she considered all 4 in about a minute and a half, in order, the way you learn to. 1. The file was damaged and had picked up junk. She ruled that out immediately. Junk data doesn't decode into clean picture. 2. The catalog record was simply wrong, typed by somebody in 2014 who eyeballed it. Possible. Common even. 3. 2 different files had been confused. 4. The 22-second version was an export, a derivative. Somebody had taken this file, cut a piece out of it, and saved the piece. And the catalog had been written to describe the piece rather than the original. She opened the file and looked at the last frame. Then she looked at the first. And that was when she understood which of the 4 it was, because the file did not begin the way an export begins. It began the way a recording begins, with the sensor coming up, 2 frames of noise while the exposure settles, and then picture. Frame 1 was frame 1, which meant the 22 seconds everyone had seen were frames 190 through 849. The middle, not the whole, the middle. Odessa took off her reading glasses, folded them, set them on the desk, and said out loud to an empty basement. The recording starts at frame 1. Then she wrote the case number on the legal pad and went upstairs to the 2nd floor, where there was a terminal with access to the public case index, and she typed it in. The index gave her a name, a date, and a disposition, and she read all 3 standing up. Boykin, Terrell J., 08/14, 2014. Investigation closed. No charges filed. Odessa put her hand on the back of the chair, because she knew that name. Every single person in Marin County over the age of 30 knew that name, and had known it for 11 years, and had at some point had an argument about it at a dinner table. Terrell Boykin was 23 years old. He was an electrician's apprentice, 2 months from finishing his hours. He had a 9-year-old sister and an older brother, and a mother who worked in a school cafeteria. On the night of August 14, 2014, he was stopped on Kettering Road at 10:52 in the evening. He was not armed. Nobody disputed that. Nobody had ever disputed that. He did not survive the stop. I am going to tell you exactly how this story handles what happened in those 9 seconds, and then I am not going to return to it, because Odessa Rule never returned to it either, and because the point of this story is somewhere else entirely. She never watched that part. Not that day. Not any day. She had the file. She had it on her workstation for 4 months. She could have played it 200 times, and she never did, because she had been doing this work for 30 years, and she had developed a rule about material like this, and the rule was, you look at exactly as much as the job requires, and not 1 frame more, because you are not entitled to somebody's worst moment just because it happens to be in your machine. What the job required was the beginning. So she went to the beginning. She worked on it that evening, alone, after the building had emptied out, with the space heater running and a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. She did it the way she'd been trained, not by watching, but by stepping, frame by frame, notes on a legal pad, in pencil, in a hand that had been described by 2 different supervisors as the most legible handwriting in the industry. Here is what was in the 189 frames that the public had never seen. Frames 1 through 3. Sensor initialization. Noise, then picture. That alone told her something, and she wrote it down and underlined it. Because that dashboard camera system, she knew the model. She had digitized 40 of them by then. Did not record continuously to storage. It ran a rolling buffer. 30 seconds of video, constantly overwritten, and when a trigger event occurred, the system saved the buffer plus everything after. The trigger event, on that model, in that department, in 2014, was the light bar, which meant the beginning of that file was not the beginning of the incident. It was the buffer, the part the system had been holding on to automatically, the part nobody had to choose to record. The part that shows you what happened before an officer decided to turn on his lights. That is not a loophole. That is what the buffer is for. Every department in America bought those systems specifically so that the moments before a stop would not depend on anybody's memory. Frames 4 through 118, 3.8 seconds. A two-lane road at night. Kettering Road, eastbound, past the industrial park. A dark sedan ahead and slightly to the right, traveling at what Odessa measured, using the reflective mile marker at frame 12 and again at frame 96, as a steady speed with no lateral movement. The cruiser stayed behind it at a fixed distance for the full 3.8 seconds. Not closing, not falling back, fixed. Odessa wrote in the margin, in pencil. He is not catching up to that car. He is following it. She looked at that sentence for a while and then she added, underneath it, or he is behind a car on a road. Don't get ahead of the evidence. That is the kind of person she was, even alone, at 9 o'clock at night, in a basement, with nobody in the world reading over her shoulder. Frame 47. This was the one. At frame 47, the cruiser drifted left. A small correction, maybe 18 inches, the kind of thing every driver does 100 times a trip, and the headlights swept across the back of the sedan at a slightly different angle. And for 4 frames, the rear of that car was lit. Odessa isolated it. She pulled the 4 frames, enlarged them, and did the only enhancement work she permitted herself, which was contrast and nothing else, because she had testified once in her Culver City years about the difference between clarifying an image and inventing one. The rear license plate was clearly legible, and, directly above it, the registration lamp, the small bulb that illuminates a license plate at night, was lit. Odessa sat back. She did not know yet why that mattered. She would find out in 11 days. Frames 119 through 130. The light bar activates. You can see it on the back of the sedan, the wash of red and blue arriving on the trunk lid. Frames 131 through 189. The sedan signals. It moves right. It slows. It comes to a complete stop on the shoulder with its brake lights on and its turn signal still blinking. And at frame 189, the released video begins. Everything the public had ever seen, argued about, taken sides on, written editorials about, and eventually stopped talking about. All of it started at frame 190. Odessa Rule closed the file, put the pencil down, and sat in that basement for a long time. Then she wrote one more line on the legal pad, and it was not a technical note. Somebody asked for the relevant portion, and somebody decided which part that was. She did not go to a newspaper. I want to be clear about that, because it is the single most important thing about Odessa Rule, and it is the reason this story ends the way it does instead of the way most of them end. She went to her supervisor. At 8:40 the next morning, she was standing in Joanne Tate's office with the legal pad, the frame counts, and a printed still of frame 47. Joanne listened for 6 minutes without interrupting, which is a skill, and then she said, "You're sure about the numbers?" "I'm sure about the numbers. Not sure like a person is sure. Sure like..." "Joanne, I have counted frames for a living for 30 years. 849. 660 in the release. The difference is 189, and it is all in front." Joanne Tate sat back in her chair and looked out the window at the parking lot for a while. "Do you know what this is going to do?" "I have some idea." "No," Joanne said. "I don't think you do. I've been in this county 31 years. She turned back around. "What do you want to do?" "My job." "Which is what, exactly this morning?" "Report a discrepancy between a file and its catalog record," Odessa said, in writing, to my supervisor, "which I am doing." Joanne almost smiled. "All right," she said. "Write it up, straight, no adjectives. Give it to me and don't give it to anybody else. And do not talk about it in this building. Not in the break room, not in the parking lot, not to the nice man who empties the trash." "Understood." "Odessa." Joanne stopped her at the door. "How much of the drive have you imaged?" All of it. Verified and hashed. Where's the master? On the county server, where it's supposed to be. Joanne closed her eyes briefly. Good. Odessa filed the memorandum at 11:20 that morning. It was 2 pages. It contained no accusations, no theories, and no adjectives. It reported a duration discrepancy, gave the frame counts, identified the released clip as a derivative export, and noted that the source file was intact and had been preserved to archival standard with a verification hash. She attached one image, frame 47, and then she went back down to the basement and imaged 11 more drives because there were 280 left and the building was coming down in April. It took 11 days for the county attorney's office to respond. Ross Kendrick was 54, the Marin County attorney, and by every account a competent lawyer who had never lost his temper in a public meeting in 19 years. He came to the annex himself, which Joanne said afterward was the first thing that worried her, because county attorneys do not come to basements. He was pleasant. He shook Odessa's hand. He asked about the space heater and said something mildly funny about the boiler. Then he sat down on a folding chair in a room that had been a film lab in 1974, and he said, "I want to start by saying you did exactly the right thing." "Thank you. I mean that. Most people would have sat on it or done something foolish with it. You wrote a memo. That's the procedure." "It is." He crossed one leg over the other. "Here's where we are. There's active litigation history on that case number. There was a civil suit filed in 2016 that settled in 2018. There's a confidentiality provision attached to that settlement, which means that file is now subject to a legal hold, and I have to ask you to stop work on it and return the source cartridge to my office." Odessa looked at him for a moment. "You want the cartridge?" "I want the cartridge, and I want you to suspend any further processing on that item, and I want your assurance that no copies exist outside the county system. No copies exist outside the county system." "Good." "There's a copy inside the county system," Odessa said. "The master image, hashed and logged, on the archive server, per the contract, which is what your office pays me to do." Something in Ross Kendrick's face moved about 1/4 of an inch. "Right," he said. "We'll want to look at that as well. Now, I want to be careful here, and Odessa was careful too, because there is a version of this story where Ross Kendrick is a conspirator, and that version is not true, and it is also not nearly as frightening. He wasn't lying. There was a settlement. There was a confidentiality provision. A legal hold on an item under a settlement agreement is an entirely normal thing for a county attorney to impose, and if you had asked any lawyer in Maryland whether he was within his authority, most of them would have said yes. The problem was not that he did anything improper. The problem was that a completely proper procedure, applied in good faith by a competent man, was about to accomplish exactly what a conspiracy would have accomplished, which is that the first 6 seconds of Terrell Boykin's life on that road would go into a box in a locked room and stay there. Nobody had to be corrupt. The machine was fully capable of doing it by itself. Odessa understood that sitting in that folding chair, and it is the reason she asked the question she asked. "Mr. Kendrick, is my contract terminated?" He blinked. "No, of course not." "Then I'd like to be clear about what I'm being told to stop, because I have 280 drives left and a deadline in March. Stop work on 14083391. Only that item. Only that item. Then I'll need that in writing," Odessa said, "because my contract requires me to complete and certify every item in the manifest, and if I skip one, I can't sign the final certification. And I don't sign things that aren't true." Ross Kendrick looked at her for a second longer than the conversation required. "You'll have it this afternoon," he said. He took the cartridge. He gave her a receipt for it, which she filed. And on the way out, he stopped at the door and said, in a different voice, the sentence that told Odessa everything about the next 4 months. "Mrs. Rule, I hope you understand this isn't about the content." "I understand exactly what it's about," Odessa said. "It's about the calendar." Here is what she meant, and here is the clock that started ticking that afternoon. The building was coming down in April. The contract required a final certification signed by the digitization contractor, item by item, attesting that the archive package transmitted to the county was complete and accurate. If item 14-08-3391 was pulled from the manifest before certification, then the archive would be complete without it, and the certification would be true, and the 6 seconds would exist only on a cartridge in a locked drawer in the county attorney's office, in a legal file, under a confidentiality provision, and every single step of that would have been correct. If the item stayed in the manifest and she signed, the full file, all 849 frames, went into the county's permanent public archive under the original case number, where any citizen could request it. The whole story, from that afternoon forward, came down to a single administrative question. Would item 14-08-3391 still be on the manifest in March? She told her son on a Sunday, at his kitchen table in Baltimore, after B had gone upstairs. Curtis Rule listened to the whole thing with his hands flat on the table, and when she finished, he did not say anything for about 15 seconds. Then he said, "Don't. Curtis. I'm serious, Mom. Don't. I've already filed a memo." "Then that's it. You did it. You reported it. That's the whole job." He leaned forward. "You are 64 years old. You're a contractor. You have no union, no protection, no pension from these people. They can end you with an email. Dad's gone. It's the house and Social Security and whatever they pay you. And that's it. That's the whole picture. I'm aware of the picture. Then walk away from it. And do what with the 11 days I spent looking at it? Nothing. That's the point. Nothing." His voice cracked slightly on the second one, and he stopped and started over. "Mom, I have watched you fix other people's things your entire life. You fixed film nobody was ever going to watch. You fixed Warren's mother's kitchen faucet at 11 o'clock at night. You have never once in your life gotten anything back for it." Odessa put her hand around her coffee cup. "You know what I keep thinking about," Curtis said. "I keep thinking about that woman, Terrell Boykin's mother. She's been living with this for 11 years. She's got a life. She's got some kind of peace, or something that looks enough like it to get out of bed. And you're going to walk in there with 6 seconds of video and blow the whole thing up. And then what? Then you go home. She doesn't." That one landed. Odessa sat with it for a long time, because he was right, and because she had already thought it herself at 2 in the morning on 3 separate nights, and had not found an answer she liked. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's not good enough." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." Curtis got up and went to the sink and stood there with his back to her. "I'm not trying to be the coward in this," he said. "I know you're not. I've just got the one mother." Odessa looked at his back, a 41-year-old man in a hospital polo shirt with his shoulders up around his ears, and she thought about how strange it is that the people who love you always make the argument for stopping, and how they are almost never wrong about the risk, and almost always wrong about what you can live with. "Curtis," she said, "come sit down. I want to tell you something about your father." He came back and sat. "In 1997, she said, Warren was running a booth in Ardmore, and a print came in for a Saturday matinee with about 4 minutes cut out of the middle. Somebody at the previous house had made a bad splice and just taken the damage out. Warren called the distributor and told them, and they told him to run it anyway, because it was a Saturday and the house was booked. And? He ran it anyway." Curtis frowned. "That's the story?" "That's not the story." Odessa turned her cup around on the table. "The story is that he came home that night and he couldn't sleep, and at about 1 in the morning he sat up in bed and said, 'Odie, there were 400 people in that room, and every one of them thinks they saw the whole thing.'" Curtis didn't say anything. "He talked about that for 20 years, Odessa said. 20 years, over a movie. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Yeah," Curtis said quietly. I understand what you're telling me. The county attorney had the cartridge, but Odessa still had the manifest, the catalog record, the memo, her legal pad, and a fact that nobody had thought about because nobody in that building thought the way she did. Every export leaves a record. Not in the video. In the system. The evidence management software that department used in 2014 generated a log entry every time a file was accessed, exported, or duplicated. User ID, timestamp, action, output specification. Those logs had been migrated twice and had ended up, eventually, on one of 391 drives in a basement. Odessa found the log on a Wednesday in November. It took her 9 days and it was not detective work. It was cataloging, which is what she was being paid to do. The entry read 08/22/2014, 1441. User, Prosser, Action, Export Segment, Source 14-082391, Out, 000630, 002830, REQ, Fisk, W. Dep, Chief. 2 names. She looked up the first one on the county employee directory, which is public, and found that Neil Prosser was 42 years old and had worked for Marin County continuously since 2011, and was currently a systems administrator in the county IT department, 3 floors above her. She thought about it for 2 days. Then she took the stairs. Neil Prosser had a cubicle with a photograph of 2 boys in soccer uniforms and a coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Dad." Odessa introduced herself, said she was the digitization contractor, and asked if he had a few minutes about a legacy item. He was friendly about it. People usually were with her. She had the manner of somebody's aunt. She put the printed log entry on his desk. "I'm trying to reconcile a catalog record," she said. "Do you remember this one?" Neil Prosser looked at it, and Odessa watched a 42-year-old man's entire face change in about a second and a half. "That's the Boykin case," he said. "Yes. He stopped. He picked up the paper. He put it down. "I did that export. I know. Your user ID is on it. I remember it." His voice had gone strange. "I remember it because it was my 2nd month in that unit. I got a call from the deputy chief's office. They said pull the relevant portion for release. And you did. I did exactly that." He looked up at her. "The stop starts when the lights go on. That's what a traffic stop is. It starts when you initiate. Everything before that is the buffer." "Yes. So I cut at light activation." He was talking faster now. That isn't a decision. That's the obvious cut point. Anybody would have made that cut. Anybody." "Probably," Odessa said. "That's why they asked you." Neil Prosser sat very still. "What's in the 6 seconds?" he asked. "Do you want me to tell you?" He thought about that for a long moment, and then he did something she respected him for permanently afterward. He said, "Yes." So she told him. The cruiser, holding a fixed distance for 3.8 seconds. Frame 47. The registration lamp. Lit. Neil Prosser put both elbows on his desk and his hands over his mouth. "The lamp," he said. "Yes." "The stop report says the lamp was out." He looked at her over his hands. "That's the whole basis. That's why he pulled him over. It's in the report. Rear registration lamp not illuminated. I've read that report. Everybody in this building read that report in 2014. Then you understand what frame 47 is. He stopped. "It's not a smoking gun," Odessa said. "I want to be honest with you, because you're going to lie awake tonight, and I'd rather you lie awake about the true version. A bulb can flicker. A connection can be loose. There are innocent explanations for a lamp that's on at 10:51 and out at 10:52, and a good defense lawyer would give you 3 of them before lunch. But nobody ever had to give one," she said. "Because nobody ever saw the lamp. Neil Prosser was 42 years old, and he had been fined for 11 years, and it took about 4 minutes to end that, and Odessa did not enjoy any part of it. 'What do I do?' he said. 'Nothing dramatic. You don't quit, You don't call a reporter, and you don't post anything anywhere. Then what? You write down what you just told me, Odessa said. Date it, sign it, put it in the file. Not the newspaper, the file. Why? Nobody reads the file. Odessa picked up her printout and folded it. Somebody read it today, she said. There were 2 officers in that cruiser on the night of August 14, 2014. The one who fired was named Dale Whitcomb. He was 30 years old at the time. He left the Halston Department in 2017 and moved out of state, and he does not appear again in this story. And I am not going to speculate about a man's interior life for the sake of a better ending. The other one was Ray Halloran. He was 41 in 2014. He had 18 years on the job. He was in the passenger seat. He resigned 14 months later, in October of 2015, and he had been driving a delivery route for a regional freight company ever since. The same route, 5 days a week, for 9 years. Odessa found him because she was not looking for him. She was cross-referencing personnel numbers in a payroll index for the manifest, and his name came up attached to the incident, and she wrote it down. Then she spent 2 weeks deciding whether to knock on his door, and eventually did it on a Saturday morning in December, in a driveway in Elkridge, while he was replacing a taillight on a Ford pickup. Mr. Halloran? He straightened up with a screwdriver in his hand. He was 52, heavy through the shoulders, with the sunburn that only comes from a driver's side window. Yeah. My name is Odessa Rule. I'm the archivist, digitizing the old evidence annex for the county. She stopped there and let him have it, because there was no gentle way in, and pretending otherwise would have been an insult. I'm calling about the Boykin file. Ray Halloran did not say anything for a while. Then he set the screwdriver down on the fender very carefully, the way a man does when he has just decided not to do something with his hands. Come on in, he said. It's cold. They sat in a kitchen with a calendar from a tire company on the wall and a coffee maker that took a long time. Ask it, he said. There are 6 seconds in front of the released video. Yeah, he said. There would be. Odessa waited. The buffer, he said. 30 seconds of it. Everybody forgets about the buffer. I forgot about the buffer for about 6 years. Do you know what's in it? I know what happened, if that's what you're asking. He turned his mug around. We were behind that car for a couple of blocks. Not long. I want to be accurate with you, because I've had 11 years to get this straight in my head, and I don't want to make it worse than it was, or better than it was. Please. We came up on Kettering behind that car, and Dale said, "That's the plate." And I said, "What plate?" And he said, "The one from briefing." Odessa set her cup down. "From briefing," she repeated. There was a plate on the board. It wasn't a bolo. It wasn't a want. It wasn't a warrant. There was nothing on that car. I want to be real clear. There was nothing on that car. It was a note. Somebody had written a tag number on the shift board with FYI next to it. Who? I don't know. I never knew. It was on the board when I got there. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Ray Halloran said. That's the whole thing, ma'am. That's the entire thing. I sat in that seat and I said, "What's it for?" And Dale said he didn't know. And then we followed that car for about 4 seconds, and he lit him up. And I said, he stopped. You said what? I said, on what? The kitchen was very quiet, and he said the tag light was out. Odessa said, was it? Ray Halloran looked at her, and 11 years came up into his face at once. I never looked, he said. I was in the passenger seat, and I never looked at the back of that car. Not once. I took his word for it, because that's what you do, and then everything happened, and by the time I thought about it again, it was 3 weeks later, and I was sitting in an interview room, and a man was asking me what I observed. And I said what I observed was that the officer indicated an equipment violation. That's a true statement. It's a true statement, he said. And he said the word true the way a man says the name of somebody who did him harm. It's the truest useless sentence I ever said in my life. He got up and refilled a cup he hadn't drunk from. "I wrote a supplemental," he said, with his back to her. "I know. It's in the file." He turned around. "You read it?" "Page 61, Odessa said. 4 paragraphs. You wrote that you did not know why the vehicle was being followed and that you were unable to independently verify the equipment violation." Ray Halloran stood in the middle of his kitchen and put his hand over his eyes. "Nobody ever asked me about it," he said. "Not the department, not the county, not the family's lawyer. 11 years. Not one person ever asked me one question about those 4 paragraphs." "They were there," Odessa said. "Yeah." He took his hand down. "They were there, and I have spent 11 years telling myself that writing it down was enough." He looked at her. "It wasn't. Writing it down and making somebody read it are 2 different jobs, and I only ever did the easy one." Before she left, she asked him the question she had driven out there to ask. "Mr. Halloran, if the county opens this, would you say all that again, on the record?" He didn't hesitate, and that surprised her. "Ma'am, I've been waiting 11 years for somebody to make me." "Nobody's going to make you." Ray Halloran nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'll have to," he said. The plate on the shift board belonged to Marcus Boykin. He was Terrell's older brother. He was 28 in 2014, and he is 39 now, and he drives a forklift at a distribution center outside Hagerstown, which is 90 minutes from where he grew up, which is not an accident. Odessa did not go to see him. She wrote him a letter because she had learned by then that some people need the door to open slowly. He called her 9 days later at 7 in the morning. "You're the archive lady." "I am." "You put a tag number in your letter." "I did. That was my car," Marcus Boykin said. "I want you to say it. Because for 11 years, everybody in this county has talked about my brother's car, and it was my car. He borrowed it on a Thursday because his transmission went, and he had a job on Friday morning in Owings Mills." "It was your car," Odessa said. There was a long silence on the line. 3 weeks before that," Marcus said, "I gave a statement." Odessa closed her eyes. "About what?" "Doesn't matter. It wasn't about anybody in that car. It wasn't about Kettering Road. It was an internal thing about a completely different officer and a completely different night, and I wasn't even the main witness. I was the 3rd guy they talked to. His voice was very level in the way that costs a person something. I gave a statement, and 3 weeks later my tag number was on a board in a briefing room, and my brother was driving my car." "Mr. Boykin, I have said this out loud twice in 11 years, he said. "Once to my mother and once to a lawyer. And you know what the lawyer told me? He told me I could not prove the 2 things were connected, and that saying it out loud would make me look like a man who needed it to be connected. He was right about the first part. I know he was right. He was wrong about the second." Marcus Boykin was quiet for a moment. "What's in the 6 seconds?" he asked. And Odessa Rule, who had spent 30 years learning never to tell anybody what a piece of film meant, told him what was in it, and refused to tell him what it meant. "There are 3.8 seconds where the cruiser holds a fixed distance behind your car before the lights come on," she said. "And there are 4 frames where your registration lamp is clearly illuminated, which contradicts the stated cause of the stop. That's it? That's it. That's not proof of anything." "No, sir, it isn't." "Then what is it?" And this is the answer she gave. And she gave the same answer 3 more times before the winter was over, to 3 different people, and it never changed. "It's the beginning," she said. "That's all it is. It's what happened first. Everybody who has ever argued about your brother has been arguing about the middle." Della Boykin was 68 years old. She had worked in the kitchen at Ridgeway Elementary School for 26 years, and she was still working there, 4 days a week, because she liked the children, and because standing was better than sitting. She had a small house on Verbena Street with a screened porch and a photograph in the front room of a boy in a graduation gown. Odessa Rule sat on that porch on a Saturday afternoon in January with her hands around a cup of coffee she did not want, and told her the whole thing, from the mismatched frame count forward, in about 20 minutes. Della listened without moving. When Odessa finished, Della Boykin said, "Is it going to bring him back?" Odessa did not soften it. That is why this scene matters, and it is why she is the person this story is about. "No, ma'am," she said. "It isn't." "Is somebody going to prison?" "I don't know. I think probably not. It's been 11 years and there's a statute on most of it, and the thing I found isn't the kind of thing that convicts a man." "Is the county going to give me money?" "There was a settlement in 2018. "There was," Della said. "It paid off this house, and it paid for my daughter's school, and it came with a piece of paper saying I wouldn't talk about it, which I signed, because I had a 9-year-old and no husband, and I was 57 years old." She looked out through the screen at the street. "You know what I do now, Mrs. Rule? I get up at 4:30. I go to that school. I put out 310 breakfasts. I come home. I watch my programs. I go to bed. I have gotten myself all the way to a place where I can do that." "Yes, ma'am." "And you want to come in here with 6 seconds?" "Yes, ma'am." Della Boykin turned and looked at her directly for the first time. "Then what is it for?" Odessa Rule did not answer that question for a long time. Long enough that Della let her have the silence, which was its own kind of mercy. And then Odessa said this: "Mrs. Boykin, I've spent my whole life fixing other people's pictures. Movies, mostly. Home movies. Reels, somebody shot at a birthday party in 1936 and stuck in an attic. And the thing about a damaged reel is that nobody in the world is harmed by it. Nobody. It's a birthday party. Everybody in it is dead." Della said nothing. "But I fixed them anyway," Odessa said. "I've fixed hundreds of them, and I have never once been able to explain to anybody, including my husband, why it matters, because the honest answer sounds foolish out loud. Say it anyway." "Because it happened," Odessa said. "And the record of a thing that happened should be complete. Not because it's useful, because it's true." She set the cup down. "For 11 years, every person in this county who formed an opinion about your son formed it from the middle of a recording. And the people who thought the worst of him and the people who defended him were doing the exact same thing, which was arguing about a piece of a picture and calling it the picture." Della Boykin's hands were folded in her lap, and they had not moved once. "I'm not going to tell you it's justice," Odessa said. "It isn't. It's 6 seconds. But it is the true first 6 seconds, and it has been sitting in a basement on Rose Street for 11 years, and in April they are going to knock that building down." She stopped. "And I have to decide what I'm certifying, ma'am. Either the record is complete or it isn't, and I don't sign things that aren't true." Della Boykin sat on that porch for a long, long time. Then she said, "My son was a careful boy." "Yes, ma'am." "He drove his brother's car like it was made of eggs, because Marcus would have killed him." Her chin moved slightly. "For 11 years I have had a thought I have never once said out loud to another living person, and I'm going to say it to you because you drove out here." Odessa waited. "I have wondered," Della Boykin said, "whether he did something." She said it very quietly. "Not something bad, just something. Whether he got smart, whether he moved wrong, whether he did some small thing that a boy does, and that's what started it." Her eyes were dry, and that was somehow worse. "Because if he didn't do anything at all, then there's no reason, and I have not been able to live in a world with no reason. So somewhere in me, for 11 years, I have let there be a reason, and the reason was my son." Odessa Rule put her hand flat on the arm of the chair. "Mrs. Boykin," she said, "the recording starts before he does anything at all." Della did not move for a moment. Then she said, "Finish your job, Mrs. Rule." Wendell Fisk was 59 and lived in a townhouse in Lewes, Delaware, 4 blocks from the water, with a screened porch and a fishing boat on a trailer that had not been in the water in 3 seasons. He had been a deputy chief in Halston for 9 years. He retired in 2019 with commendations, a pension, and a plaque. Odessa went to see him in February. She did not call ahead. She thought about it for 3 days and decided that a call would give a man time to build a wall, and that she would rather see what was there before he built it. He answered the door in a flannel shirt. She told him who she was in one sentence. And Wendell Fisk stood in that doorway and did something that she thought about for the rest of her life. He did not ask a single question. Not what do you want? Not who sent you? Not what's this about? He said, which part? The export request, Odessa said. August 22, 2014. You asked for the relevant portion. I did. Why that cut point? Because that's where the stop starts. The buffer starts 6 seconds earlier. I know what a buffer is, Wendell Fisk said. He stepped back from the door. You'd better come in. It's February. They sat in a front room with a window on the street. He did not offer her anything, and she did not want anything. Are you recording this? He asked. No. Would you tell me if you were? Yes. He nodded slowly, as though that had settled something. Ask your questions. Did you know what was in the 6 seconds? Yes. Odessa had not expected that, and she had spent 4 days preparing for the version where he said no. You watched it. Twice, he said. On the 18th, 4 days before I asked for the export. And you asked for it to start at light activation. I did. Why? Wendell Fisk looked out the window at his street, and then he told her the truth, which was worse than a lie would have been. Because it wasn't evidence of anything, he said. And I need you to understand that I still believe that. There's a car on a road. There's a cruiser behind it. There's a light that's on, that a report says was off, which happens, because bulbs fail intermittently, and every cop in America has pulled a car over for a tag light that came back on by the time he walked up to it. So why not release it? Because it looked like something. He turned back around. That's it. That's the whole answer. And I've had 11 years to find a better one, and there isn't one. It wasn't evidence. It was atmosphere. And in August of 2014, in that city, atmosphere was going to burn the place down. So you protected the city. That is what I told myself for about 4 years, Wendell Fisk said. And then I retired, and I had a great deal of time, and I revised it. Odessa waited. I protected the department, he said, and I told myself it was the city, because the two things looked the same from where I was sitting. They always do. That's the trick of the job. From inside that building, the department is the city. Odessa sat forward. Mr. Fisk, the plate was on the shift board. He did not flinch. She watched carefully, and he did not flinch, and she believed what came next because of it. I've thought about that more than anything else, he said. More than the video. And I'm going to tell you something, and you can do what you want with it. All right. I don't know who put it there, he said. I've never known. There was no system for that board. There was no log, there was no approval, there was no form. Somebody wrote a tag number on a whiteboard with a dry erase marker and put FYI next to it, and 11 years later, that is the single most consequential document in this entire case, and it does not exist, because somebody wiped that board on Friday morning like they did every morning. He put his hands on his knees. You want a villain, he said. I've met the people who come looking, and they all want a villain, and I understand it. I'd want one too. I don't want a villain, Mr. Fisk. I want a manifest. Wendell Fisk actually laughed at that. One short, unhappy sound. Then here's what I've got for your manifest, he said. I approved that board. Not that entry. The board. I ran that briefing room for 6 years, and I let a room full of officers write whatever they wanted on a whiteboard, with no record, no accountability, and no way to ever ask anybody why. Because it was fast. Because it worked. Because we'd always done it. He looked at her. I didn't kill that young man. I want to say that plainly, and I'm not ashamed of saying it. But I built the room where a tag number could sit on a wall with nobody's name attached to it. And then when I saw 6 seconds that would have made somebody ask about that room, I asked for the video to start later. The clock in his kitchen was audible from where they sat. So, no, Wendell Fisk said. It wasn't a conspiracy. Nobody conspired. Nobody had to. I made one phone call on the 22nd of August, and it was 11 words long, and I've been carrying it around ever since, like a stone in my shoe. Odessa asked the last question she had come with. Would you say all of that to the county? He was quiet for a while. Will you tell them I said it either way? Yes. Then I'd rather say it myself, said Wendell Fisk. The whole thing came down, in the end, to a spreadsheet. Not a courtroom, not a press conference, not a confrontation in a hallway with everybody watching. A spreadsheet with 391 rows in it and a column at the far right that said certified and a signature block at the bottom. Here is how it actually went, and it is the least cinematic sequence in this story and the only one that mattered. February 19th. Odessa submitted a written request to the county attorney's office for the return of item 14-08-3391 for completion of processing, citing the contract's certification requirement. It was 2 paragraphs long. February 26. Ross Kendrick denied it, citing the legal hold. February 27th. Odessa wrote back and asked one question: whether the county intended to remove item 14-08-3391 from the digitization manifest, and if so, requested written notice of the amendment for her records. That is the entire fight. That one sentence. Because if he amended the manifest, he had to sign something. And if he signed something, it existed. And if it existed, it was a public record of a decision to exclude a specific item in a specific case from a permanent archive 8 weeks before the building housing the original was demolished. Ross Kendrick was a competent lawyer who had not lost his temper in a public meeting in 19 years, and he understood exactly what had just been put in front of him. He did not answer for 11 days. In those 11 days, 3 things happened, and none of them were Odessa's doing, and all 3 of them were the direct consequence of a woman knocking on doors in the winter. Neil Prosser wrote a 2-page memorandum describing the export request of August 22, 2014, dated and signed it, and filed it with the county records office, and with the county's independent auditor, which was his own idea and which was the smartest thing anybody did in this whole story. Ray Halloran drove to Halston on his day off and asked to make a supplemental statement, and when he was told the case was closed, he asked for a form and wrote it out standing at the counter and made them stamp it received. And Wendell Fisk mailed a 4-page letter to the county auditor from Lewis, Delaware, with a return address on it, describing a whiteboard. None of those 3 men had to do any of that. 2 of them had been carrying it for 11 years, and 1 of them for 4 minutes. On March 10th, the county auditor opened a review. On March 12th, Ross Kendrick lifted the hold on item 14-08-3391 and returned the cartridge. He sent it down to the basement with an intern. There was no note. Odessa Rule finished the digitization of the Marin County Evidence Annex on March 27th, at 4:15 in the afternoon, 11 days before the building came down. 391 items, every one imaged, verified, hashed, and cataloged. Item 14-08-3391 was processed exactly like the other 390. She did not treat it specially, and she did not want to. She imaged the cartridge, verified the image against the source, generated the hash, corrected the catalog record from 000022 to 00002828, 30, and entered a note in the standard field for such things. Catalog record corrected. Prior entry described a derivative export, frames 190 to 849. Source recording comprises 849 frames. Complete source preserved. 41 words. That is the whole act. That is what all of it was for. Then she printed the manifest, signed the certification at the bottom of page 9, and put it on Joanne Tate's desk. Joanne read the whole thing standing up. "You corrected the catalog record," she said. "That's the job." "Odessa," Joanne set it down. "You know that once this is in the archive, it's a public record. Anybody can request it. Any citizen, any reporter, any lawyer, no explanation required." "I know. You didn't have to correct the entry. You could have imaged it and left the record alone, and nobody in 100 years would have known." "That's true." "Then why?" Odessa Rule thought about it for a second. "Because it deserved a real answer." "Because a catalog is a promise," she said. "It's the only promise an archive makes. It says, what's on the shelf is what the card says it is. That's it. That's the whole institution. And if the card is wrong, then everything else in that building is a rumor." Joanne Tate looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up a pen and signed underneath her. The county auditor's review ran for 14 months. I'll tell you what came of it, plainly, without dressing it up, because dressing it up would be its own kind of edit. Nobody went to prison. There was never any realistic prospect that anybody would. The statute had run on most of what could have been charged, and the thing Odessa found was not the kind of thing that convicts a man, she had said so herself, on a porch on Verbena Street, in January, before she knew whether it would cost her anything. Dale Whitcomb was living in another state and declined to participate. Wendell Fisk sat for 11 hours of interviews across 3 days and answered every question, and the auditor's report describes his cooperation as complete. The report itself ran to 206 pages. Its central finding took up one paragraph on page 4, and it was not about a shooting, it was about a whiteboard. It found that the Halston Police Department had operated for at least 9 years an informal system of vehicle and person flags communicated verbally and by dry erase board in shift briefings, with no origination record, no approval requirement, no expiration, and no audit trail of any kind, and that the department was therefore structurally incapable of answering, in any incident arising from such a flag, the single most basic question available to a citizen. Why did you stop me? The county enacted a written policy in the following budget cycle. Every operational flag now requires an originating officer, a stated basis, a supervisor's approval, and an automatic expiration at 90 days. All of it logged, all of it retrievable. It is 11 pages long, and no one has ever made a film about it. And in the personnel section of that same report, at the back, where nobody reads, there is a recommendation that the county adopt a standard requiring that any video released to the public from a buffered recording system be released from the first available frame, and that any departure from that standard be documented in writing and signed by the official who directs it. That recommendation was adopted. The internal shorthand for it, among the 4 or 5 people in that building who knew where it came from, was the rule, and Odessa Rule hated that and said so, repeatedly, and it did not help. In September of the following year, Della Boykin asked to see it. She had waited 14 months. Nobody pushed her. Marcus asked her twice, and she said no both times. And then one Tuesday, she called the county records office herself and made a formal request as a citizen, filling out the form and paying the $11 retrieval fee, because she wanted it done the ordinary way. They gave her a small room on the 2nd floor with a monitor and a door that closed. She asked for 2 things. She asked that the file be stopped at frame 189, and she asked Odessa Rule to be the one to run it. Odessa set it up. She cued it to frame 1. She showed Della where the spacebar was, and she started to explain the frame counter. And Della said, "Just play it, honey. 6 3/10 of a second is not very long." Della Boykin watched it with her purse still in her lap and her coat still on. At the end, she said, "Again." Odessa played it again. Again. Odessa played it 11 times. And on the 11th, Della lifted one hand off her purse and pointed at the screen at frame 47, the 4 frames where the back of that car came up bright. And she did not say anything about the registration lamp, because she did not care about the registration lamp and never had. She was looking at the corner of the frame. "That's Hollis Street," she said. "He's 4 minutes from my house." Odessa had not known that. "He was coming to see me," Della said. "He always came Thursdays." Then she sat back in the chair and looked at the frozen frame for a while, and the thing she had carried on her own for 11 years came out of her in 4 words, very quietly, more to herself than to the woman beside her. "Then it wasn't him." Odessa Rule said, "No, ma'am. It was never him." "No, ma'am, it wasn't." Della Boykin nodded once and put her purse strap over her shoulder and stood up like a woman who had somewhere to be, because she did. She had 310 breakfasts to put out in the morning, and she had never once missed a day for anything except a funeral. At the door she stopped. "Mrs. Rule, what was in the part you didn't show me?" And Odessa, who had held that file on her workstation for 4 months and had never once played past frame 189, told her the exact truth. "I don't know, ma'am," she said. "I never looked." Della Boykin studied her for a moment. "Why not?" "Because it wasn't mine," Odessa said. They took the annex down on April the 8th, at 9:15 in the morning. Odessa Rule went and stood across the street with a cup of coffee to watch it, because Warren would have gone, and because after 12 years she felt she owed the building the courtesy. It came down in about 40 seconds. Buildings always look surprised. And afterward she walked back to her car, thinking about the thing she had never been able to explain to her husband, or her son, or anybody in the trade. The reason she had spent 30 years fixing pictures that nobody was ever going to watch. People think an archive is about the past. It isn't. Nobody builds a shelf for the dead. The dead are past helping. An archive is a promise made to a person who does not exist yet. Some stranger, 40 years out, who is going to need to know what actually happened and will have nobody left to ask. Everything else in this story, the auditor, the policy, the 11 pages, the whiteboard, the 206-page report, all of that was the machinery of the world grinding forward the way it does, slowly and late and never enough. But there is a room in a county building in Halston, Maryland, with a shelf in it, and on that shelf is a record that says item 14-083391 is 28 3/10 of a second long. It used to say 22. A woman with good handwriting and a pair of reading glasses counted 849 frames in a basement on a Tuesday afternoon and corrected a card. That's all. That is the entire thing she did. And for 11 years, every argument anybody in that county ever had about Terrell Boykin, every editorial, every dinner table, every conversation between a mother and her own mind at 3 o'clock in the morning, had started at frame 190. It starts at frame 1 now.